Hey there, this is Creighton Berman, and I wanted to dig in a little deeper into this Kickstarter project canvas idea. So essentially, what the Kickstarter canvas is a worksheet for jamming on a campaign idea. So if you've got an early idea and you want to start to figure out all the components from who you're going to be trying to sell to how you're going to make it, to how you're going to pay for this whole thing, you could print this out and put it on the wall, or just do it like a worksheet and get into all the details. And by the way, this is heavily cribbed from the business model canvas, which you can look up a book called Business Model Generation, and you can learn all about that. But this one specifically is about design projects on Kickstarter. So before we jump in, just to take one step back, there's sort of three variables that I always tell people for a successful Kickstarter campaign. And honestly, this is probably for successful products as well. So you've got a Venn diagram of three shapes, and the first one is the question of whether this product is desirable. So this means, do people, when they see this thing, do they want it? Is there value there for them? Are they excited by it? Does it serve a function or solve a problem or provide some sort of new experience for them? Something that they're really going to truly love. The second variable is whether the project is feasible. So this means, is this something you can actually pull off? So with the resources that you as an independent creator have access to, the manufacturing resources that you know how to get a hold of, the techniques that you know how to work, et cetera, is this project feasible? Would you know how to run this and get a high quality product out the other end? And finally, the last variable is whether this project is viable. So this is all about the finances. So is this project gonna make you go bankrupt, or can you find a way to actually pull this off and make it profitable? And this obviously goes back to value again for people. Is this something that people are gonna be willing to pay for? So with those three variables in mind, hopefully your project sits right in the middle of something that people really want. It's something you can pull off and something you can actually budget. So the canvas maps directly to this. So taking a look at the canvas again, you'll see here that in the middle is the project definition, and we'll go into what that means in a second. But over here to the right, you've got all the parts that kind of make the whole campaign desirable for people, right? You tell stories about your project, you find the people and why they want to connect with it, and you find ways to promote and communicate what you're doing to those people. And over here to the left, this is where you talk all about the feasibility, right? So this is where you think about all the components and the ways you're going to produce them and the resources you need to make it happen. And then finally across the bottom here, and this is where you think all about viability. So it's all about kind of creating that budget and figuring out what rewards you're going to offer to people. So let's dive a little deeper into each of these sections so we can talk about really what you'll be filling in. And most designers will start right here in the middle with the project definition. I mean, you could certainly start from anywhere. Maybe you have a certain set of backers that you have access to, like a niche community you're a part of, or maybe you have a ton of Instagram followers. You could start on the left with a production technique too. Maybe you have a family member who owns a plastics injection molding shop or something. But for most designers, I think the value starts in the middle, right? With what we want to make, with the thing that we have a vision of, the thing that we're passionate about and excited about. So starting right here with the project definition, this is where as you would probably want to sketch it out, kind of visualize what we're talking about. And then really we're talking about answering some questions, right? Like, so what is this thing, right? If you were to describe it to someone, how does it work? What makes it special, right? So, and a lot of times, there's something really unique that really sets it apart from all the others out there. Really make sure you're communicating that. Another really important question, especially for Kickstarter projects, is, are you passionate about this? What part of it makes you so passionate and excited? What's going to keep you excited about this a year from now, right? And then what's the value proposition, right? And this is the business term, but really it's like, why are people willing to put down money for this? What gets them excited? And what's the pitch, right? If you were to describe your project to someone in 30 seconds in an elevator, like, how would you describe it? Because that's literally what you're doing on Kickstarter, right? You have a very, very short amount of time to pitch someone an idea, right? And then if you want to move over to this section over here, this is where you start to ask, or answer, who is this for, right? So, I think it's great when people design for niches and subcultures, but you really have to know who that is, right? And really define, how you get to them. And of course, why will they care, right? It's one thing to just design something for a subculture, but you got to make sure it's something they actually will respond to and hits at the right time for them. And then as you think about that, where do these people hang out? Where are you going to access them? Are you a part of this community already? Like, is it something that you have access to, or do you need to find them? And then finally, this is going to become more crystallized when you start talking about the finances below, but how many people do you need to make this happen? And, obviously, are there enough of these people out there to make what you want to do happen? And you'll start to think about that more clearly once you have some numbers. So now that you've got a project defined and you kind of know who you're trying to get So now that you've got a project defined and you know who you're going after, the next obvious step is to think about the story, right? And so I think in this case, understanding that the product is one thing, but the story is really what brings it to life, right? So what I like to do is storyboard all the key images and scenarios for how this product's going to be used. And so I'll pull out a whole bunch of blank note cards and just start to sketch out all the different views I think I need to explain this thing. And that might be everything from technical, like how it's used, to lifestyle, to gifts and other things. But you really want to both visualize the entire way you want to tell the story, but also start to write and really work on writing, because a lot of Kickstarter is writing. It's scripts, it's written word, it's communication. And then finally, you have to move down and start to think about how you're going to promote and communicate. So this is really about how you'll connect with your backers, both during the campaign and after, right? And so you have to think about what channels can you go through. Is it blogs? Is it traditional press? Is it social media? Who are those influencers out there that can actually make a difference? Someone that's got 100,000 Instagram followers can really get you out there. So the way I like to think of it is you've got your project definition, and through promotion, you connect with backers that you've defined. And the backers come to your project and engage with the storytelling and learn about your product, right? So it's just a cycle, right? And it doesn't work without one of those links in there. So once you started thinking about desirability, it's time to start thinking about feasibility. And a great place to start is with the components. What parts make up this design that you have here? And, as a designer, you probably have a pretty good idea of all the different components that make up the product. And if it's your first time launching something independently, I would urge you to do less, do more with less. The more parts, the more assemblies you have, the more problems might be. But it's not just about parts, right? There might be other bonus things. That's the fun thing about a Kickstarter, is you might throw in extra publications or extra supplies or whatever it is, and you need to source those as well. So it's good to think through every single component that you need. Once you have that, it gets a lot easier to start thinking about production. Who is going to make each part of this thing you've designed, right? How many different producers will you need? Because if you've got different materials, it may require totally different producers. And then you've got to assemble these somehow. So can one of those be the master manufacturer and they assemble everything, or is that all going to come on you? These are things you need to start figuring out. How are you going to guarantee quality? Or maybe with the materials you've chosen, are they handmade? Are they precision? How will you determine that? And then, of course, the timeline. Just figuring out how long it's going to take to do each part and then, of course, assemble them, and being a bit conservative with the timing. And, of course, the quantity. How many parts do you need? Where do the price breaks happen, right? And finally, the other part of the feasibility section that I think is oftentimes overlooked is all the resources you might need. There's probably partners, or it could be space, or there could be like labor that you need. You need friends to help pack something, or you need to pay someone to pack or assemble something. And then other services like video or photo or things like that maybe you could pull off yourself, but it might be better served if you actually build that into your budget. So now that you've started to think through the feasibility section of this, right? Who's going to make it? What are the parts of what you're making, and what are the other resources you need? You could start driving all this into a budget, right? So that there's production costs involved here. There's going to be shipping costs, and maybe you charge the customer the full shipping, maybe you don't. Of course, there's fees through working on Kickstarter. And then, of course, there's other fees that are going to come in here as well from your resources. But ultimately, what I look for is a break-even cost. At what point will I break even and maybe profit with extra inventory? And that's sort of where I set my Kickstarter goal. And then the other side of the whole viability section is the rewards, right? Like, what is this thing you've designed worth? What are people willing to pay for it? Trying to figure out that value that is fair in the marketplace, but also profitable based on your manufacturing fees, is where you really need to set your reward tiers. And most likely you're going to have more than one tier. Maybe you have a basic entry level tier and you got a more premium tier in here, but that's the time when you figure that out, when you lay out these levels. And all of this comes together in a spreadsheet, which you can learn more about in the link in this article. And so that's a quick overview of all the major sections of the Kickstarter project canvas. So obviously, all of this, the first pass is just a chance to kind of think at a very high level about all the components of what you need to get figured out before you can even think about launching a project. And the more you iterate on this, the more robust it can become. And it could actually be a tool that your team uses that you put up on the wall and you're constantly coming back to and addressing as you develop this project. Probably the best way to understand it is to run a project through it. So why don't I take one of my projects and put this through the canvas, and so you can kind of get a better sense of what I'm talking about. So recently, last summer, we launched a product called Coffee Maker number 3. So if I were to do the canvas for that, I would start right there in the middle with the project definition. And it all started with this idea of an all-glass coffee maker that was more like a pitcher, and allowed you to do pour over a couple different ways, make manual coffee a couple different ways. One would be a ceramic pour over dripper. One would be a French press plunger that would fit into the same container. And it could also do cold brew, right? So it's going to have an all glass double walled pitcher. This is a black ceramic dripper, and then French press parts with all kinds of different components there. And then of course there's a cork lid that goes with this as well. So that's the basic product. So what is this thing? Why does it exist? How does it work? So obviously, the pour over and French press, these are all techniques that kind of already exist. So luckily, I'm not trying to explain people from scratch how it works. But what makes it special? Well, so I thought when I was launching this, the fact that it holds 40 ounces of coffee was super special, right? Not a lot of pour over coffee products out there did that much. They're mostly focused on single cup. So that was a unique factor. I think the 3-in-1, the fact that you could do 3 different styles of coffee brewing in one unit was important. I think the fact that this coffee that you brew in there stays hot. So because of that double wall glass, keeps the coffee hot for up to an hour, and that's a pretty big differentiator. I thought also the fact that it's a pitcher, it could be used for other things. A lot of the other coffee products out there were just for coffee, and I thought this kind of cool that this could be used throughout your day in a bunch of different ways. And so that, those are some of the main ones. There might be a few others out there, but that's sort of, what I thought made it special. For me, why am I passionate about it? Well, obviously, the brand that I have, Manual, has done coffee products in the past before. And so, I personally have a big passion for designing coffee products. It made a lot of sense for the brand because we already have a coffee product. And in this case, it was for a Kickstarter Gold promotion. So Kickstarter asked creators to come back and rethink old projects. So that was perfect. That made me super excited. And so essentially it kind of all came together in that way. And so the pitch was, taking pour over coffee and making it for everyone and giving you a lot of different, making it very flexible, right? Being able to brew a bunch of different ways, being able to keep it warm for a long time, use really inexpensive filters. These just use standard auto drip filters. And kind of all those things combined, really, the idea behind this, the pitch behind this was, a very flexible, open system, right? So I'll write down open here. Open and flexible. So with those thoughts in mind, when I was thinking about backers, like who would back this, I was thinking sort of not the biggest coffee nerds out there, not people who are already kind of have gotten into this a while back and have really gotten deep. I think it's more for maybe people who appreciate good quality things, but and like pour over coffee, but they want to entertain, right? So current coffee tools right now, they mostly pour over. They mostly make it in small batches. If you get something that can make it in larger batches, it'll get cold really quickly, or in the case of a French press, it would just keep steeping. So this is something that people can really use to entertain, and have multiple people at the table, or maybe it's for yourself and your partner or whatever it is. So I really wanted, I really imagine this to be backers who are not hardcore, coffee people per se, but people who appreciate quality, right? People who really want high quality food experiences in their life, right? And so this isn't so much a niche, but it still is, obviously, compared to like the mainstream coffee consumer. It's definitely a bit of a niche. So it's definitely people who are interested but not obsessive. Put it that way. And so where do I find these people? Well, I already knew there's a bunch of different places on the internet where, you can find them. These are, fairly mainstream. So it's not like I'm going into forums and searching out for really specific people. But at the same time, I know this isn't like your everyday target consumer either, right? And as far as how many backers I needed, well, I wasn't really sure. I knew in the past I had gotten anywhere from, I could get 600 to 1,000 people on a project I had done in the past. So I was hoping I would, for somewhere in that range, be able to get that many people, right? And so moving over to the production side of things, well, before I got there, I started thinking about components, right? And so I've got glass components, right, in the pitcher. The dripper is ceramic. I had to source French press parts, so here's French press sourcing, right? So that is the metal parts and the post that you use. The actual wooden ball for the French press I had to get made, so that's a wooden ball. I had cork components, right? There was a lid that was cork, and then this part of the French press was cork as well. And then of course there's packaging, and I had actually roasted some coffee, or had worked with a friend of mine to roast coffee, so that was another component. And I think there was even like a towel in there, so like a dish towel that was involved here, and a postcard. I think I even threw in there, just kind of a promotional piece, right? And so that's the vast majority of all the parts. I'm sure there might have been more, but that's a lot of different parts, right? And so, ice cream guy going by. And so when I start thinking about how I'm going to produce that, that's a lot of different manufacturers. And in my case, I work with a manufacturing agent that helps me interface with these folks. But obviously for each one of these components, I would have to have a separate manufacturer, most likely, bring all these pieces in, manufacturing them all, and then one manufacturer that kind of brings them all together and boxes them, right? So that's a pretty large amount of things to worry about, right? And luckily the agent takes care of that, on the ground for me, but there's still a lot for me to manage and design as well, right? So obviously we thought about timeline. Each one of these components takes a certain amount of time to make. The ceramic especially is one that takes longer just because of the process of slip casting, right? So it's important that I think about all those timelines and what it'll take to kind of get them all together in the same box, right? Because the glass could be done well before the ceramic, let's say, and then would be sitting around, right? So it's important that the timeline lines up into something that's useful. In my case, because I was shipping from overseas, the shipping is part of that timeline too, right? Things take a while to come from Asia back to the U.S., so I had to make sure those 20 to 30 days were kind of built in there as well. And of course, I got production quantities out of that and kind of figured out what quantity I can make that would give me the right price breaks, essentially, right? And all of that information fed right into my budget, right? Figuring out how much the production costs are going to be, how much the shipping is going to be, and all these other expenses, and that kind of gave me my break even. This is what's going to cost to do this project, right? So, one other thing that I should mention, so the resources. So, I always work with a partner to do video and photo work, right? And, we needed a location to shoot the video. Luckily, it was a friend's house, but still, I was going to, give her some sort of gift or something to thank her for that. I was going to be working with a shipping warehouse, which has certain charges I had to think about. They do all the shipping for me, but still, it isn't free. And there might be other things as well, other resources that I needed. But that's a good quantity of them, and all those can feed into my budget as well, right? So I've got the production costs, right? These are all the costs that come in through making the object or the products we're making, and then I've got all these resource costs that go in here as well. And all of that kind of goes into my budget spreadsheet, which you can learn more about. At the link in below this video, but essentially you can set up a very robust spreadsheet that helps you plan for kind of what is your break even. And that's the way I like to always frame up a Kickstarter for me is, what can I do that'll break even? And the profit is in extra units that are produced. So, obviously if 500 people back a project, but I do a 1,000 unit run, then I've got 500 units to sell myself, and that's the actual profit. So for me, a Kickstarter is successful if it can break even. Obviously, if it funds beyond that, that's great. That's extra profit that I can put back into production, or use as payment to myself or whatever I want to do. But that's kind of the way I set up the budgets. And so then when you think about how that kind of feeds into your rewards, so this same spreadsheet that carries your budget should also be able to manage your reward levels. So, the pricing kind of gets figured out here. So I know per unit what this thing costs to make. And so I can set my pricing however I want to set it. I could be marking it up, 4x, like a standard kind of retail cost, or I could be doing anything in between. But that kind of helps me figure out how much it costs, what the minimum I can charge people for this is. And once you know that, you could say, okay, here's how many people I think I can get, and here's what they will pay. Can that reach me? Can that get me to break even? And then that's my goal, right? That break even, usually somewhere in that range, is my Kickstarter goal. And you can play with that. That's what's great about a spreadsheet, right? So I could say, well, I'm going to have, let's say I had 3 or 4 different reward levels for the coffee maker campaign. There was, I think I had one. I think I was testing the waters. I want to see, what if I did a French press only? What if I did a pour over only? And what if I did a combo? And it turned out the combo was the most popular thing by far. But still, I want to test it out. And so I set prices for each one of these, and then played with the numbers of people and what they would have pledged. And so, I could say, well, what if I charged $100 a unit? How many people do I need? Okay, what if I do $80 a unit? How many people do I need? Right? So, you can play with these numbers, the price that people of the rewards that people are paying. You can play with the number of people, right? So this is a variable, this is a variable. And then, of course, how much you're charging people, or how much it actually costs to do what you want to do, right? So, and that kind of helps you kind of figure out your whole budget. So this is easier to see in a spreadsheet, but just kind of as you think about how the finances run across both sides of this canvas, that's one way to think about it. And finally, stepping back, thinking about how I did storytelling. So like I mentioned previously, I like to kind of think of all the scenarios that I want to show that are important, right? And I kind of storyboard those out on index cards. And so in this case, it was really important to me to show materiality of the product. It was important to show all the ways you could use it, the scenarios of use, the idea of entertaining, right? Showing it at a table, showing people eating and having this coffee maker out. The idea of using it for things other than coffee, right? So I definitely knew I wanted to have a scene of, being used for water. And so I thought through all those scenes, and that's this storyboard, along with some written script, right? So I did a lot of writing that I knew would feed into on the Kickstarter page would be the written section, but it also could turn into a script as well, right, for the video. So when we're shooting video, that essentially was the script, and we didn't shoot film, but there's a film camera. So it's kind of nice that this can feed into two things, right? It feeds into the kind of the website copy, and it feeds into a script for the film. And then the storyboard, of course, also worked that way as well. So I was able to say, these are the photos I need, these are the scenes I need in the video, and all of that comes together pretty nicely when you think of it that way. And then finally, one of the hardest parts, I think, as a designer, is the promotions and communications. So, this is how you're going to get your press release out to people, how you're going to get them to even notice. I think, the PR part of it can be a challenge for a lot of designers who are very comfortable with making things, maybe even comfortable with setting up budgets and kind of figuring out stuff like that. But ultimately, you really need to get the gatekeepers, the bloggers, the people who write for magazines, the influencers to care about what you're doing and connect to your backers, right? If you just launch a project and have some great storytelling, you're going to have some real challenges to get these backers to even notice you. You really need the promotion to kind of get more and more people to pay attention to your storytelling and connect back to your project. And so you can read in the link below more about how I like to set up press releases, but now that's obviously always important to reach out to people of influence in the press or on blogs. I think now more than ever, just the idea of an influencer, someone who maybe has an Instagram account with a lot of people paying attention, your own email list. If you have been collecting people's emails for years or people are interested in what you're doing, that's obviously a great place to start to get those who actually care about what you're doing to connect with you first. So yeah, that's the basic definition of the canvas right there. So as you can see, this is kind of how I would run one of my projects through that. And it's a great way. You could do this in probably about a half hour, sketch it all out, and have a pretty good sense of what you need to figure out, what you don't know, what you do know, and could get you started.